I can't think of a better place to start than this term that I've seen thrown around on the internet, the high value man. This term, I think, captures the root of so much of what goes wrong in people's conception of masculinity, more than the boys don't cry or the toughen up talk. Okay. All right. Let's be honest. Men want to feel valued, to be seen as useful, as someone who contributes meaningfully to his family, to society, to loved ones. It feels good to be valued. It feels shitty when you're not. I think this is probably true for just about everyone, regardless of gender. Okay, so far, nothing harmful, just normal human desire. Can't fault a person for wanting to feel valued. It's a way to feel seen and appreciated for what you bring to the table. So, okay, so far so good. Okay. Here's where shit slowly starts to get twisted. And I want to be clear about something. Shit gets twisted not by some nefarious design. It's not because there's some evil person like, I'm going to go ahead and, mess with people's head or anything like that. No, this is just some normal human shit. Okay. Let me try to lay it out kind of one by one. All right. So there's two kind of things that I think are kind of coming together to create this idea of being of high value. Okay. So first off, we want to be valued, but we also conflate being valuable with being valued. Okay. All right. So what do I mean by this? Well, you might be valuable, right? So you might have something of value to bring to the table, but others may not recognize you for the value that you bring. Okay. The former is your actual value, like what value you actually bring. The latter is how you're being valued by others. Okay. Sometimes these are aligned, which I would say is good, right? So oftentimes this is what we want, right? If you bring something to the table, you bring something of value, you want to be acknowledged by others for the actual value that you bring, and they do that, that's good, okay? Sometimes, though, these things deviate, and it deviates in either direction, right? Either you are valued more highly than your actual value, or you're valued less than your actual value because people are not seeing what value you actually have. Okay, again, nothing nefarious, just normal human stuff. We as an individual or as society don't necessarily value things correctly. I might simply overlook some of what you do for the community, and so I undervalue you. Or I might be overly enthusiastic about something you did that materially maybe had very little impact, and so I overvalued what I thought you brought, right? What I think you did. Okay, mistakes happen. Some try to exploit these mistakes to create them by puffing themselves up to be more valuable than they are, right? So you might know people like this, right? They try to make themselves out to be bigger than they really are, or that more valuable than they are. A coworker, a supervisor, you probably know somebody somewhere in your life that does this. And, they often take credit for other people's work or for things that were like just sheer luck, and it's not really anything that they did themselves to bring it about. Okay. But there's a reason I stress the difference between our actual value and how it is that we are valued. Our value is something inherent in us and is better aligned with reality. If I want to be of greater value, I can make choices or develop skills or whatever else that I could do in my power to actually be of greater value, like work harder or whatever else. Okay? How you are valued, however, is not something under your control. I can do things to shed light on what I bring to the table to try to make other people aware so that they would value me, right? But if others don't acknowledge it, they don't care, they don't see it the way that you see it, right? Then I'm not going to be valued no matter how valuable I actually am. Right. And you might have experienced this discrepancy as well at work, at home, right? You clearly bring something of value, doing some work or fixing something or contributing in some ways, but nobody recognizes it. Nobody acknowledges it. No one appreciates it. And you can't make other people, see it if they don't want to see it or if they don't bother to or try to, even if you try to bring it to their attention, right? other people will acknowledge you or not based off of something about them, not anything about necessarily about you. Okay. I hope that distinction is clear. All right. So here's what happens, right? Then when we conflate being valuable with being valued, okay, we begin to accept that how others value us is our actual value. Right? And this happens especially if we care more about how we're being valued. And there's good reason to care about how we're being valued. It has material consequences for our lives, right? It matters for, whether or not you get that promotion or raise. You need to be acknowledged in order to, advance in your career or make more money or whatever else, right? Charge more for your services. But when we start to conflate these things, right, here's what happens, right? Our self-worth becomes tied to what others say our worth is. Again, this is not some horrible thing that the world imposes on us. I think this is just some fairly normal, developmental factors that probably contribute heavily to this, right? Namely, in childhood, like when our caregiver's perception of us matters greatly. And then in adolescence, when it's part of the development to care more about what our peers, our friends think of us, right? When others' opinion of us matters so much to us, it shouldn't be surprising that we begin to value ourselves through the eyes of others. This is, again, everybody has this. Everybody does this. Everybody feels this way. Like, this is just normal human stuff, okay? The problem isn't that people do this. No. The problem is that maturation, right, growing up, requires that you combat this to the appropriate degree so that we start to see ourselves for the true value that we hold, right? And this is so that we don't value ourselves through the eyes of others, but rather certain realities about ourselves. Why do I think this is an important part of maturation? Well, for one, it's just false to conflate the two. It's the difference between perception and reality, right? I don't know about you, but for me, part of growing up is becoming better at seeing truth. Like, for instance, you stop believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, right? You could play along, you could appreciate what it did for your childhood or whatever else, but, you don't really grow up, at least in part, unless you could differentiate between falsehoods and reality, right? Like imagination and reality, okay? So in the least, you should develop some awareness of the difference between your own value and people's perception of your value, right? These are two different things, right? But second, and I think more importantly, right, your growth in mental health, I think, depends on your being able to make this distinction, right? The longer you stay dependent on other people's perception of you, if that's all you care about, because you've kind of like blurred the lines between your actual value and how people value you, you just treat them as one and the same, right? You tend to then just go ahead and live your life for other people. You lose your sense of self. You become all about how people perceive you, right? I feel like this is kind of what fame does to people, right? You become so absorbed in how people perceive you, that matters so much, that you just lose sense of what it is that you yourself actually want or desire or what you yourself value, right? So what ends up happening then is, because you're constantly under the control of other people's perception of you, right? You're essentially giving up your sense of self. And this is kind of what leads to things like depression and anxiety, right? You're always anxious about what other people will think of you. You get depressed when people don't like you, right? Like you become a slave essentially to other people's perception of you, okay? So to recap, right, or to summarize, one mistake that we make is conflating our actual value versus how others value us, right? Again, perfectly natural, but to some degree at least, it needs to be combated, and you need to kind of differentiate between them as you mature. As I said, because this is for your own good, for your own mental health, but also, this is just kind of like just reality, right? Like seeing reality for what it is. Okay. The second thing that I think happens is that we care about our value relative to others. We play the comparison game. We look at our peers and we see how we stack up against them. This is not a matter of competition necessarily, right? So I want to set that aside for now, though I will come back to it, right? This is the recognition of like rank or placement in the totem pole of life, right? Who is higher up in status than another? Where do I land in this ranking? it's an acknowledgement that some of us have more or can do more or are more capable in certain areas than others. We do this with others, right? Like when we, argue about the greatest basketball player of all time, and that's what are we doing? We're ranking players, right? And we have arguments about who's better or worse. And we do this with ourselves, like when we measure up our academic placement in our class, or when we rank our, economic class, right? Like how much we're capable of purchasing. Exactly what are we tracking for this ranking varies based on the situation or the personal interest or, whatever it is that you're trying to compare. So you could compare along all kinds of, standards. It just depends on what it is that you're kind of comparing, right? As long as you're comparing like to like, right? So some common factors are, wealth, power, intellectual ability, popularity. Sometimes it might be some combination of these things. Sometimes it's across generations, sometimes just amongst your peers within that generation. Okay. Siblings do this with each other, like who is more liked by a parent or who is better at something, right? This is all, distinct from whether or not we have value. We might all have value, right? You might all think like you could all be very intelligent, but we would still play this comparison game. Even though we could all acknowledge that all of us are intelligent, some are more intelligent than others, right? Or some are more physically more fit than others or whatnot, right? Okay. It's about more or less. Okay. And here again, there could be, this could match reality or it could just be perceived and it might just be something that's deviates from reality. Okay. Again, perfectly natural to play the comparison game. I'm not going to fault you for playing the comparison game. Everyone does this. It's perfectly normal. Has I've never met a person who's never done this before. People just do it from an early age, like from childhood with siblings, later on at school with peers, later on in adulthood and working life. We all do this to some degree. Anybody who says that they don't is full of shit. Okay, pretty normal. All right. However, again, maturing, growing up, right, requires that we keep this comparison game in check. Okay. Like we don't let it get out of hand. Why is that? Well, look, comparing yourself to others in this way, excessively anyways, does real harm, not to others, but to yourself. One common example of this that people often reference is keeping up with the Joneses, right? This idea that, you move into a neighborhood, you have a neighbor, and then you start playing the comparison game, right? Like, oh, they got a new fence. So it's like, so now I need to get a new fence to keep up with them. Oh, they got a new car that's shiny and brand new and expensive. I need to get a new car that's shiny and brand new and expensive, right? Okay. When people start, looking at each other's wealth status and trying to stack up against them and trying to, outrank them and be better than them and so on, right? This is when people tend to get into, buying things that they really can't afford, right? That they stop living within their means because they're too caught up in this comparison game, right? My friend bought this nice expensive house. I have a house that suffices for my own needs, but because my friend is demonstrating this higher status with their expensive house, now I feel a need to go ahead and work my butt off to make more money or to take out loans to go ahead and get a nicer house relative to my friend. Okay. This makes me feel better because now I'm higher up in the rank than them. And we continue to pursue this rank, even if it means that, again, we make dumb decisions for ourselves, even if it's financially costly to us, even if it's costly to our health, we're not taking care of ourselves or our relationships, right? Sometimes, because we, like if you get too competitive, let's say at work, then because you're putting in all those work hours, then your relationships start to sour, right? Relationships outside the work. Okay. Prioritizing rank in this way will eventually hurt you. The one prioritizing the rank in this way, that's the person that's going to get hurt. Again, it's you, not anyone else, right? The other people who are not playing this game, they're not worried about this. You're the one that's working yourself up to a frenzy in order to try to keep up with others or feeling greater than or less than. Okay. It's also psychologically damaging to constantly be playing this comparison game. Like, look, you never feel like you're enough. And I think this is kind of like what I'm primarily concerned about, right? Because the truth is that there will always be someone to compare yourself to, and on some measure will be higher ranked than you, better than you or something, right? You're setting yourself up to become insecure for the rest of your life. because you'll never be satisfied or with yourself or your accomplishments, and you're constantly looking to find validation by beating the person next to you. Okay? So you're doing this to yourself by playing this game. This is all, again, not out of some competitive spirit. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is stemming from just your need to go ahead and be in a higher position than the person next to you. This is not healthy competition stuff. This is just downright insecurity. Okay? Which brings me to my final point about why we need to mature out of this comparison game. When you're constantly concerned with your position relative to others, you are putting yourself at the mercy of this ranking, real or not. It could be some fake ranking or whatnot. Like, you become absorbed in this in a way that you end up putting yourself under the thumb of whatever this ranking is. You're not acting out of your own desires. You're not acting out of your true values, the things that you really care about. You're not prioritizing in accordance with what you care about. Everything you're doing is to maintain or improve your rank, regardless of you. Regardless of you. Again, you're giving up yourself for the sake of keeping up with whatever this thing is, this comparison game that you're playing. What you want, essentially, what you actually want becomes irrelevant, because what matters is that you beat the person next to you, not whether or not you've accomplished the things that you yourself actually care about. Okay? So now we have these two considerations on the table regarding what needs some maturing, right? That there's a tendency to conflate our actual value with how others value us. And it's important that as we mature, we start to make sure that we're clearly differentiating between those two. And that, even though it's perfectly normal to care about how others value value us, that we recognize that that's not the same as how valuable we really are. Okay. And then second, that we play this comparison game, but we want to make sure that we keep it in check so that it's not to the detriment of ourselves and to others, right? So like any other game, it's fun and games until it starts hurting people, right? So if the comparison game is, and this is kind of like a surefire way of when you figure out you went too far, right? Is if it's actually starting to do harm to yourself, right? Financially, health-wise, in your relationships, in your mental health, right? Then the comparison game has gotten out of hand. All right. Whew. Okay. So let me return to this term, high value man. Okay, so now that we talked about all that, let's return to this idea of a high value man. What the fuck is a high value man? Now, I can try to play dumb here and say, oh, all that means is a man that has some value, that brings something to the table, someone who isn't a bum, but who values themselves, has integrity, yada, yada. Okay, look, that's bullshit. No one, at least in the public sphere, is using the term in this way. Maybe there's individuals here and there that are like, oh, this is how I understand it, right? Look, it's not how the term is being used, okay? The way this term gets thrown around, there seems to be two implications. One, you're valuable as a man based on how others or society judges your value. There's some external standard for whether or not you're actually valuable, right? And this is based off of like whether or not you make the right amount of money, whether you have the right height, or whatever the standard is, okay? And two, your value can be compared to others and deemed high or low on some scale, right? And the reason that we can talk about a high value man is because there's also a low value man, right? So there's now a ranking system that's just like instantly built into this whole concept, okay? When we put these two together, you end up with something toxic. You end up with something very unhealthy, and it's very unhealthy specifically for men, okay? Let me begin by giving you a simple example from spaces that use this term high value man. The dating world. Okay, so assume I am a straight man looking for a partner, someone to take out on a date. I am in a pool of other bachelors looking to find a partner. Okay, what makes me a high value man? You're higher ranked than all these other candidates, and you're perceived as such by the potential partners. Okay. What might that be? It depends on the pool of partners, but oftentimes this pool of partners might want something along the lines of you're tall, handsome, make a good salary, sociable, physically fit, have friends, respected by the community, educated, come from a good family, yada, yada, yada. And these are all things that a potential partner values or wants. Okay. Okay. Let's back the fuck up. All right. Think about what we just set you up for. You now playing this little game, this dating game. This way of seeing dating basically just says, fuck your feelings. You as a person playing this game about what you actually want and who you are and how you value yourself, right? Your self-perception or, what you like about yourself. None of that matters, right? Okay. What matters is whether or not you stack up to these external standards that's now imposed on you, right? And you only see your value insofar as you fit these standards, how you stack up, whether or not all these potential partners value you enough to go out on a date with you. Notice what's happening, right? What's missing in all of this is you. You're the one that's doing the dating, and yet who you are, your image of yourself, your own history and the kind of person that you value yourself to be and all the things that you might value about yourself that doesn't fit in or map onto any of these standards, right? That's all missing. That's all gone in this conversation. All you are then in this game, if we're playing along these lines of, whether or not you meet these, standards of what a high value man is by these potential partners, right? What you end up doing then is that you made yourself into just nothing more than some combination of qualities, like a Build-A-Bear or something, right? Like it's like you're taking like, oh, I like this quality. I'm going to add that to the, shopping cart. Oh, I like that quality. I'm going to add that to the shopping cart. And then you just smush it all together. And whether or not you have all these things, that's what determines whether or not you are a high value man. Okay. If a partner sees you in this way, right? Just think how degrading it is for you, how dehumanizing it is, how used you must feel. You're not being valued at all for who you actually are, but whether or not you meet these standards, whether you have these qualities, right? Well, look, when I hear a man say, I don't like being used for my money, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, does it? Like it feels like you're being used, doesn't it? Why is that? Because the person in front of you, they don't seem to be valuing you for you, but rather for your money, the quality, not you, but the quality, the characteristic you bring to the table, right? How is it any different than any of these other standards that we use to stack ourselves against each other, right? Imagine hearing, I want to be with you because of your looks, because other people like you, because you're tall, right? You, a person, have been reduced down to these qualities, nothing more. You, as a whole person, as an actual human being, is not what matters. It's the qualities that you have. And you're in there screaming out like, hey, I want you to like me for me, right? I get that all these things are nice, but I also want you to get to know me and like me, like who I am, that is distinct from just all these different qualities that I might happen to have. Okay. While this notion of a high value man says who you are isn't enough if you don't meet these standards. That's the distinction, right? Like you want to be liked for yourself, but this notion of a high value man says the exact opposite. Says, look, who you are doesn't matter. All that matters is whether or not you meet up to these standards, whether you have these qualities. So you play the comparison game because clearly you're not good enough if a person is not willing to go on a date with you, but is willing to go do so with someone else. So then you now feel like you need to improve yourself on this scale of value and that others are using. And you're fully playing the game now, the game that just others dragged you into playing. And in this game, jealousy, resentment, pride, all masked as some natural, normal competition becomes a central theme in your dating life. And then, so what does your dating life look like? You're constantly working to meet these standards, but never receiving love for who you are. because that's not the way love works in your mind at this point. Once you're fully immersed in this game, you've convinced yourself that other people love you for the qualities you have and nothing more. And so what are you left with? You're left feeling lonely, depressed, unseen, unappreciated. Is this all sounding familiar? Right? You don't feel love for who you are because when you're playing the game in this way, you don't think that the other person loves you for who you are. You think that they love you for these qualities. And so you do your best to try to keep up, make sure that you maintain these qualities. Once you lose them, the fear then is that you're going to lose this affection that this person supposedly shows you. Okay? Okay, here's where people start to point finger outward. Blame society, the dating world, women. Slow your horses, okay? When it comes to this whole dating game stuff, look, let me ask you, do you like yourself? Like, I'm genuinely asking, do you like yourself? Okay? If you do like yourself, right, what do you like about yourself? Now, when you are wanting to date someone, what is it that you are really wanting? Isn't it quite simple? I mean, at least it is for me. I mean, you might think differently, but I don't know. For me, it's quite simple. You want the person you're with to like you for the very things you like about yourself, right? You won't want them to like you for your potential, right? Like, this is kind of like a lot of guys, I've heard a lot of guys talk about like, oh, I don't want to feel like a project, right? And I get it. Like, part of what's going on here is that you feel like they like you for your potential, not for who you are, right? So you don't feel accepted and you don't feel appreciated and loved for who you are. You feel love for who you will become if you do the right things, right? So you, again, it's now this more performative thing where you need to match up and, you know, develop certain qualities to gain affection, okay? No, what you really want at the heart of it is you want them to like you for you. So then, why are you seeking out being valued by those who don't see this in you? Again, return to what I had said earlier about the way we confuse what matters. Do you want to be valued for your true value, or do you only want the perception of value? Some people will say that perception is all that matters. Fine. If that's you, try living that way and see how empty your life feels. Go. I do it. Come back to me. Let me know when you feel like, no, that's the right way to go. I should have just cared only about perception and, you know, that's all that matters to me. We'll have a conversation when we get to that point. Okay? If you're like me, you want to just be valued for the value that you really hold. You want to be appreciated for who you actually are. Not for what you can do for someone else, but just for being who you are. You want to be valued for the fact that you're caring and considerate, reflected in the way that you spend money on others, not for the fact that you spend money on others, not for the behavior, but rather for the fact that it's a reflection of your truest self. You want to be valued for wanting to maintain good health, or for enjoying exercise, not for being somebody that can be paraded around in public with a new outfit or with a certain body, right? Like, that's like, you feel used. You feel like an object. What a horrible feeling. Okay? Look, everything I'm saying here about the dating world also applies everywhere else in life, like in the workplace. As an employee, what is it that you're really wanting? You want to be seen for the value you bring to the business. You want to be paid in a way that reflects the value you bring. You want to be treated in a way that shows that you are valued. All right? When we talk about job satisfaction, this is what we're talking about. When you aren't being paid a fair wage, yes, it's unfair, but more personally, right? The reason you feel slighted is that the paycheck seems to be a reflection of how the company values you, and it seems like the company isn't valuing you properly. Right? They're not seeing the real value in you, the way that you think that you should be valued. Even more, you might experience competition within the company for promotions and raises, pitting you against your coworkers. When it's not a healthy competition, it rarely is when there are high stakes like money and livelihoods involved, right? then we now see our coworkers differently. It becomes harder to be happy for a coworker's success or recognition. What we do is we're, again, playing the comparison game. And then we do this to each other, right? We feel devalued. We feel, overly valued, but we don't care. We just want to be better than the other person. We want to get paid more than the person next to it, right? Like, again, we end up playing these games that end up deviating us, like pulling us away, right? Pulling us away from who we genuinely are and the value that we genuinely bring. Okay. What I'm pointing out is that when we set up the world and discussions of, what it is to be a man in this way, that assumes or incorporates the idea that the value you see in yourself doesn't matter and that your value is not as important as what it is in comparison to others, we create space for something really toxic. For too long, men have been put in this kind of space, and then you wonder why so many of us turn out to be complete bitches. We get too caught up in this shit and lose ourselves in the process. Let me give you a personal example. Like, look, when I was in 10th grade, it was geometry class. I had a teacher who would jokingly, I love the guy to death, but he would jokingly call me King Albert because I often got high marks on tests. I just happened to be very good at math, and I also happened to be very competitive at the time. And so always wanted to get the top score on all the tests, right? And of course, when I didn't get the highest mark, he would jokingly say that I had lost my crown, right? Now, I didn't think this itself is something horrible. I'm sharing the story because there was a recurring theme throughout my academic career. I got caught up in this game of trying to stay on top academically, right? I had to be the smartest. I had to have the highest grades, right? Some of this was driven by my own anxieties. I've spoken about it in other episodes of my podcast, but I also felt a deep sense of pride in this part of myself, right? That this is one place where I knew that I felt like I knew I could succeed. I wrapped my identity around this idea that I was smart, I was competitive as hell, and it was toxic, not to others, right? Other people, I think I might have overthought like how much other people might care, but other people really didn't care, right? Other people may not have even noticed. They might not have even, batted an eye at it, right? It was toxic to me. So here's what happened. In college, I started every term with a sign that I would make for myself of the outcomes that I wanted in that particular term, right? And one of the recurring things that I had on my list was A+ for every single one of my classes. Anything else is a failure, right? Highest honors, right? Get this award, yada, yada, right? Okay. When I hit these goals, I felt like the shit because I felt like I was better than everyone else. When I missed, I felt like I wasn't anything. I felt low, okay? None of what I was feeling was actually tracking reality. I mean, look, A+, right? If you don't know in college, right, some of these classes, some of these instructors don't actually even give out any A+, right? So A+ didn't even exist for some of these classes, but I still put it as a goal, right? So I was setting myself up for failure. And, it actually also didn't impact your GPA, right? So, an A, an A+, they were all the same GPA, at least the college I went to, made zero difference, right? So what I was striving for didn't map onto reality in any way. It didn't actually translate into anything meaningful. It was just more me feeling a need to, as a matter of pride, of needing to feel comparatively smarter than others, right? It's like if I got an A+ and the person next to me got an A, then I was better than them, right? Okay, so you can imagine how crushed I was when reality slapped me in the face and I got rejected one after another from one PhD program after another. I think I applied to about 25 schools. I got into 2, but one of those acceptance didn't feel like a real acceptance because they didn't really offer like full financial support. And if you know anything about philosophy PhD programs, if you're not going to get full financial backing and you don't have parents who could pay for your education, you're going to take on debt that you probably can't repay, right? So I essentially got only one offer, and that was demoralizing to my ego. Then I started the program and realized, damn, the other students were damn good at what they do. In fact, they were better than me. I could tell. I was playing the comparison game. I was trying to stack myself up against the people that were next to me. And I was like, shit, I thought I was a shit, but these people are better at what they do, right? Ooh, their insights are much more insightful, right? Ooh, their papers are of higher quality. Ooh, they publish something that I would never have been able to publish, right? All that insecurity I was trying to mask with accolades, I couldn't mask it anymore. Reality always wins. Reality always wins. And the reality was that I wasn't the shit. Did that mean that I had no value? No, but it sure felt that way because I wasn't thinking of what value I actually had. I wasn't even concerned with anything about myself. I was so consumed by the outside standards, the perceived rank and value in society, in the academic sphere, in whatever circle I was running in. I lost myself in that game and so couldn't even love myself, couldn't even appreciate how far I had come or how much I had grown as, a learner, as an instructor, in all these different ways that I have, grown and matured and become better, right? I couldn't even appreciate it because I was so caught up in this comparing, this comparison game. This is a real consequence of treating dating, work, friendships, just life in general in that way. We end up having a hard time loving and appreciating ourselves. We cannot see ourselves as anything other than how the world views us. Sometimes even worse. The world might not even view us in that way, but we think because we project onto the world what we think that they want from us. And so we impose even a harsher standard on ourselves. And so no wonder you feel like shit when you play this game. Look, I'll be direct. The very idea of a high value man is some bullshit bitch assetry. It promotes a way of viewing ourselves that leaves us at the mercy of others' perception of us, and it leaves us trapped in an unwinnable game of comparing ourselves to others. When you are living for others, and especially in some comparison game, you don't stand on your own shit, right? Like what you end up becoming is just like a shell of a real person. You don't even take the time to think about what you genuinely care about whether you're living the life that you actually want for yourself. In fact, you might be so detached from yourself at that point that if I asked you, like, what do you really want outside, apart from all the kind of standards that you're trying to, live up to, you might not even have an answer. You're constantly looking to be seen by others and to be valued by others instead of actually valuing yourself. I can't think of a bigger bitch than that. So then what should you do? Look, I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert. I often tell students this, and they always, like, my students always tell me, like, you always say the same thing, right? Like, go see a therapist, right? Because I think at the end of the day, you need to figure out what actually works for you, because it's your life. It's not mine, right? It's your life, right? But I do want people to, like, collectively to take a moment, step back and ask themselves, right? Like, look, who are you and who do you want to be? Like, who do you genuinely want to be? A lot of this is going to involve you being able to have a deep understanding of your own history, of how you're raised, about your own experiences and how that impacted you, and what ultimately kind of ends up mattering most to you, right? But ask yourself, like, what kind of a person do you want to truly be? Set aside any concern for how you'll be perceived or how you'll be, when you stack yourself up to other people. Think only of yourself, right? Turn your attention inward. Are you the kind of person who loves to geek out about board games? Do you find joy in watching anime and cosplaying and interacting with others at Comic-Con? Do you prefer to express yourself through interpretive dance? What matters to you and what you love about yourself is where you need to start. If you're having trouble, my guess is that you've been so consumed by how others have valued you in the past or the demands that you feel maybe now on you that you might not even know yourself well enough to be able to answer these questions. Then this will be a good time to discover something about yourself, right? And like I always tell my students, then also go see a therapist because that'll be a great place to go ahead and do this kind of self-discovery. Look, I'm not saying that you should be or do whatever the hell you feel like. We'll unpack this as we go, through the series, right? But what it takes to stomp out the inner bitch in you, right? But you can't even begin the process of not being a bitch if you start under the control of other people's expectations and demands, right? That being under that control, right? Being under those standards and living under those standards and just losing yourself, it's like automatic bitch, right? It just automatically will make you a bitch. So at least as a starting point, you need to start figuring out where the line is between the world and you, between the world's demands and expectations and your own expectations for yourself. Okay. And you can't make that separation until you have a clear sense of who you are. I'll end with this. From my experience, as you gain a firmer sense of yourself and what it feels like to have a clear distinction between yourself and others, you begin to see a bit more clearly just how much of a bitch people are when they move through the world trying to gain recognition from others or play this comparison game. Even the ones that are supposedly at the top of this game, like the alpha males, right? Like, look, I didn't get here until I was like, I think maybe late 30s, 40s, right? It took a while for me, right? So I'm not going to pass any judgment on people who are still working on it in adulthood, right? But, once you get to a place of being able to see it, right? Like, even like these alpha males, these people that are kind of well respected in the community and so on, a lot of them start looking like nothing but a bitch. Right. And the reason is that because you know what it feels like to have this good sense of who you are as opposed to what the world wants, you could see how based on the way that people move through life, you can see how much of their life is dedicated to, mapping onto what other people give them or perception or value that they put on them versus how they value themselves. Right? What matters to them, what they're passionate about, what matters to what they do with their life. So as I said, when you give up who you are and try to become what everyone else says you should be to be of any worth, you've already made yourself a bitch. Don't be a bitch. Stand on who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly.